Hi, I'm Ted Wolf, presented by Guidewise. Welcome to the Implementors podcast, where we connect you to the stories and insights of people who have mastered implementation. Why? Because ideas are easy, but implementation is hard. Join us as we uncover the secrets of successful implementation so you can conquer your implementation struggles. Welcome to the Implementors podcast presented by Guidewise, where we focus on the topic of implementation because ideas are easy, but implementation is hard. My guest today is April Dunford. April is the founder of Ambient Strategy. She's the author of 2 books, Obviously Awesome, and her most recent book, Sales Pitch. She's a consultant, and she has an excellent podcast called Positioning. Welcome, April.
Hey, it's great to be here.
April, in doing my research for this podcast and this conversation, I noticed that you are a systems design engineer.
Yes.
Could you explain what that might be?
Yeah, that's a good question. I went to school at, I'm Canadian, and I went to school at the University of Waterloo, and they have a program there called Systems Design Engineering, which I think is a little unique. I'm not sure there's a lot of other engineering with that exact name. I think the original idea behind it was going to be kind of interdisciplinary, and there was going to be, we were going to talk about systems theory, but we were also going to talk about other stuff, and there was some involvement with the architecture department or something in the original idea of it. But for me, like if you ask me what systems design engineering was, like it felt a lot like a mix of mechanical meets software meets electrical. So we did a certain amount of electrical. We did a lot of programming. We did that kind of thing.
So what led you to that as you started to understand what that major might be? What did you find attractive there?
To tell you the truth, I originally went to university and I thought I was going to be a doctor. So I was studying pre-med, and then I changed my mind about it. And I had always been interested in tech. And I picked systems design for a bad reason. Like the reason I picked it was I was already going to school at Waterloo, which was at the time was considered like, the big deal engineering school in Canada. And the year that I was making the switch, systems design was the hardest thing to get into. And so I decided that was the best thing because it was the hardest to get in. So I picked that.
So it sounds like you like challenges in your life, right?
I guess. I don't know. Maybe that's ego or something. But I was like, I don't know what the difference is between all these things. I'll pick this one because this is the hardest to get into. So it must be good. Everybody's trying to get in.
Okay. So you proved yourself. You were effective there and you could do that. How did that lead you, that type of thinking, the systems design type of thinking? How did that lead you into the world of technology where you found yourself?
Yeah, well, I always figured I was going to end up in tech, and everybody from systems design comes out and ends up in tech at some place. And but I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do after my degree, and so I was broke. I had a really big student loan, and I was mainly just trying to land a job so I could pay off my loans. And I happened to have a friend of mine working at a technology startup. And they were looking for somebody in product marketing. And I did not know what that was. But the requirements for the job were you needed to be unafraid of public speaking. And I, unlike a lot of engineers who didn't like speaking in public, I was okay with that and had done quite a bit of public speaking. So I thought, okay, unafraid of public speaking, I got that. And then the second requirement was the thing I was assigned to was a database. And so you needed to know a certain amount about SQL and be able to write SQL queries. And I was like, yep, I got that. And my friend worked there and she put in the word for me and I got the job. And so, I wasn't really thinking about it being the marketing department. I didn't think about the job itself all that much. All I thought about was, now I work at a software company and I'm doing this thing. And shortly after that, the company got acquired by a big company in the Valley, and my boss quit, and I was around, and they made me the vice president of marketing, which was just a weird decision. I was really junior, and I didn't know anything about marketing. I'd just come out of engineering school, But I kind of put my head down, and I was lucky. I had a really good team, and a lot of the folks on my team were very senior, and they did not want the manager job. And so they were, helpful in keeping me in that job, I think.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And then what was interesting was, my early experience working in marketing was that at that time, which we're talking about early 2000s, at the time, there wasn't so much like numbers thinking going on at marketing. Like marketing was a lot of hand waving, a lot of branding. We were in the early days of digital marketing, and people weren't used to the fact that we could measure everything now, and we could actually track things and see what worked and what didn't. And so I always felt like in marketing, I was surrounded by a lot of people that were saying, "Hey, it just works because it works." And we'd say, "Well, how do you know it works?" And it was like, vibes, man. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
that just didn't shore up with my little engineering brain. So, I always wanted things to be systematized. Like I always wanted to be, there's inputs and outputs. And, if we're doing a thing, we should be able to measure it and then adjust it and make it better and improve on it. And so, I think it was good timing for me to start in marketing because we were in the middle of this wave of going from, doing a lot of brand oriented marketing that we couldn't measure to doing a bunch of marketing that's quite measurable. And then doing things that were just, again, sort of moving from things that were just, well, this just feels right. And, don't question the creative vibes of this thing to something that we could put process around it and say, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. And so I thought that served me very well in the early part of my career. Now, of course, like almost everybody thinks like that in marketing. Like we are quite systematized in marketing. Not that the creative stuff has gone away. We care about that too. But it was a good time to be an engineer in marketing. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Curious question. Everything turned into a lot of things turned into numbers and quantifying, if you will, aspects of marketing. The creative vibe, would you say that's the emotional side of marketing?
Well, here's the thing that I've learned about emotions in marketing. Like I always worked in B2B. And so, it's not the same as selling soda or toothpaste. I'm selling a database or I'm selling a big CRM system. And I think there's a tendency to think that, well, people are rational decision makers. And I don't think that's true. Like I do think emotion plays a big part in it. But I think that the way we think about emotion in consumer products is really different than the way we think about emotion in B2B. So if I'm selling something, like a $200,000 database system, it's not like selling toothpaste where, I walk into the store, I pick the toothpaste that's on the shelf. Maybe I've heard of one, maybe I haven't. If I make a bad choice, it's no big deal. I just don't pick that one again. And that's it. And I make the decision. It's just me. If it's a $200,000 database system, it's totally different. Like there's a person in charge of that purchase process, like a champion for that deal. But there are a lot of other people involved, and those other stakeholders are going to have to be in agreement with this thing to get bought. And so that means you as the champion are going to have to make the case for this thing. And you can't just walk in and say, I like the box. It was green. You're going to have to make a case for how is this going to help the business make money? How is this going to help the business save money? Now, where the emotional part comes in is, anybody that's worked in a big company will understand that, if you're making a recommendation for a company to purchase something, like there's some stakes there. Like if I make a wrong choice here, this is not going to look good on me. I'm going to look, my boss is not going to be happy. Other people, the other stakeholders are not going to be happy. And so there's a certain amount of fear in that decision. And that is, so I think we have to recognize that. And as B2B purchaser or B2B vendors selling to these purchasers, we have to recognize how difficult it is to make a decision like that and how fraught it is from an emotional perspective that, often what you'll see is that companies get so paralyzed with this fear that they make no purchase at all. And in fact, the data on that is terrifying. Like the data tells us that 40 to 60% of B2B purchase processes end in no decision, if you scratch down in that data, the majority of the time, it's not that they decided that the status quo was better and they'll just keep doing what they're doing. It's the majority of the time, the problem was they looked at all the options. They couldn't figure out how to make a decision without there being a lot of risk in that decision. And they just decided, well, we'll just kick the can down the road and we'll figure it out next year or the year after.
Mm-hmm. So I think that there's an area in business, as you mentioned, B2B, selling a hard product, computer system, database, whatever it would be, very analytical, very logical in what they're doing, but the emotional part is making the decision.
Yeah, I think this is why incumbents have such a big advantage. Like you and I both worked at IBM. Like there used to be that nobody ever got fired for picking IBM. Right. I don't know if that's true anymore, but in certain markets, like if I look at the CRM market, if you're looking for an enterprise CRM and you're not picking Salesforce, like you almost got to make a case for that. It's very easy for a purchaser to come in and say, we're just going to pick Salesforce. Everybody else uses it. They're double the market size of everybody else in the market. I mean, why wouldn't we just pick that? And it's a very safe choice to make that is unlikely to come back and cause you pain. And so if you're a vendor out there in the CRM market trying to sell against Salesforce, well, you're going to have to arm your purchaser with some pretty big reasons to not go that way, because the emotional pull to pick the safe thing is so strong.
Yeah, and I think one of the insights that I think is your curiosity and creativity and how you set up, if you will, in your process is very good, because you talk about what is your market insight, and that immediately draws value to it. And to me, that builds safety. Value is safety if you can follow through in that argument. So I thought that was very, very insightful on your part. Could you tell us a little bit, how did you come to arrive at that conclusion that it's the market insight that's really where the starting point of everything?
Well, so when I started looking at, positioning became my thing sort of early on in my career. And one of the things I noticed is that, it's one thing to figure out your positioning, which is, who's my competition? How am I different? What's the value we can deliver that no one else can? What does a best fit customer look like? What's the market we intend to win? It's one thing to intellectually understand that positioning. It's another thing to arm the sales team and the marketing team with a story around that is compelling for customers. And so, when I first started doing this work, I assumed that we had a kind of a sales pitch structure that everybody agreed on, because there's so much good sales training out there. And salespeople, get way more training than anybody else in the organization almost. And I was surprised to see that there wasn't kind of a standard or accepted sales pitch structure. So I started looking at sales pitch structures. Now, when I was at IBM, this was shortly after they had done an engagement with these folks called the Corporate Executive Board, who are famous for writing the book, The Challenger Sale. So they were doing, not full Challenger, but they were doing kind of Challenger-ish stuff at IBM. And when I watched the way the IBMers did a pitch, it was interesting, because they never started with here's the problem, which I think is a very ego-driven thing to say. Like, customers are experts in problems. We are actually not the experts in problems. We're the experts in solutions. But they would come in and say, you've got, previous places I worked, they'd come in and say, you've got this problem. And customers would look at you and go, yeah, buddy, tell me something I don't know. So they didn't start with the problem, nor did they come in and go straight to product. That was never the way IBM pitch was done. So they would always start with the IBM's point of view on the market. And that point of view was generally informed by, what they'd seen across tons and tons of customers. And they'd say, look, we work with tons of customers that look like you. And because we've worked with all these different companies that are world-class, we see this. And because we understand this in a different way, because we've seen it across all our customers, we built our products in a different way. And that building it in a different way results in, we can give you something that you're not going to get from any other vendor, because it started with this insight. customers, it turns out, are starved for that. Like, and you really noticed it in the pitches that we did at IBM. Like, it's almost why you want a sales rep there in the first place. Like, we know everything about our own situation. We know everything about our pain and our problems. The customers know that stuff. What we're coming to you for is insight on solutions. And what I don't know is, how does everybody else solve this problem? And what are the things that work and don't work in the market? What should I be careful about here or not be careful about here? So I think it's very powerful for a sales rep to come in and start with this insight and say, you know what? We've been thinking about this for a long time. And we work with a whole bunch of companies just like you that are tackling this same kind of a thing. And here's what we've seen. And there's this insight into, almost the problem behind the problem. Or if you really want to tackle this problem, here's a bunch of things you got to think about. And so given that, what we do is different.
Yeah, you had mentioned we both work for IBM. I went through their sales training. And as I was going through the training, it occurred to me, they're teaching me to talk about things that aren't technical, being a technical company. And the entire sales approach was talk about business problems. Don't talk about how we're going to solve them. Talk about the business problem. And by the way, I'm going to bring you in and I'm going to show you this computer now. And that's kind of one tool that we use. It never fall into the technical jargon and the technical language.
That was for way later in the conversation, like if we're way down the road on a complex deal and we're on meeting number 9, and at some point the techie people are going to talk to the techie people and they're going to get deep down into that stuff. But what gets you to that meeting is never that.
Right.
Nobody cares about the tech. They care about, what is the tech going to do for my business? So stay focused on that.
Going back to the insight concept that you have is very good, because you're actually talking about a business problem. In technical terms of business, not technology. And you're talking in terms that really arrive at or help a person create the value in their mind of your product. And again, that whole insight that you have, I think, is very, very good, very well put. Do people have difficulty getting to the market insight?
Yes, I think this is hard. I don't think this is easy. Sometimes what you have, and I've seen it with companies where the founder is still there running the company, and the company hasn't done major pivots. Sometimes you get lucky and the founder is there and said, you know what? I built the whole thing based on this insight. And the founder can tell you, this is the insight. This is what I saw happening in the market. No one else was tackling this. I decided to tackle it. And that's how we got to where we got to. But even if the founder's got it, the founder can't necessarily explain it in a way that, every sales rep on the team could tell that story. But sometimes you get lucky and the founder's got it. The majority of time, if the company's a reasonable size, the company looks completely different from, what it did when the founder originally founded it. And, there's a whole bunch more products. The company has shifted their positioning in the market several times. They're no longer focused on the thing that the founder originally thought they were going to focus on. And so where does this insight come from? And in my work, what we do is, we start with the positioning, and we start by getting really clear on what is the value you could deliver that no one else can. So if we start there and we say, okay, this is our differentiated value. We are the only company on the planet that can deliver you a combination of this business value plus this business value plus this business value. Once we have that, then we can reverse engineer the insight out of it to a certain extent, because what we're saying is, okay, so that's the value you can deliver that no one else can. What does a customer need to understand in order to understand the importance of that? So I'll give you an example. So I worked with a company called Level Jump. I use them as an example a lot because they've been acquired and now they don't care if I talk about them and give away their secrets. But Level Jump, they were in the sales enablement space. So this is software to train sales reps. Very crowded space, lots of other vendors in that space, lots of very well-funded vendors that were bigger than Level Jump in that space. Their big differentiated feature was that they were built on top of Salesforce. They were the only one that was built on top of Salesforce. And so then you might say, okay, well, so what? What's the value of that? Well, the value of that is they're the only sales enablement software where it's shared data between your sales data and the sales enablement data. And then you say, well, so what about that? Well, who cares about that? Well, now that you have this shared data, you can actually measure the results of your sales enablement. So if you did the sales enablement training, did it improve time to first deal? Did it improve time to make quota? And so you could actually measure the ramp time for a new rep. So that's pretty valuable. So once we got there, when we were doing the positioning exercise, we said, okay, that's the differentiated value. And then you say, okay, well, what does a buyer need to understand the value of that? Well, if you look at all the other sales enablement tools out there, none of them are measuring that. So instead, they're measuring, did they take the course, and how far did someone get through the course, and how much were the materials used, and a bunch of other stuff. But the insight here is if you can't measure the results of sales enablement training with sales data, then how do you ever prove that your sales enablement training was working? How do you ever see what's working and what's not so you can improve the training itself? And so in their sales pitches, Level Jump would always start out with, I'm pitching to the head of sales enablement, and I would say, look, sales enablement is important, right? And the head of sales enablement says, yeah, it's important. We know that. And you say, well, why is it important? It's because every day your rep's not making quota costs you money, right? So how do you measure that? Crickets. And then it's like, well, look, you've got options. Like you could use a solution that looks like this. It's basically a content management system, and put all the stuff in a repository. Reps can get at it. That's good. You make sure people are using the right version of the sales materials. You could use an LMS, a learning management system, and set up courses, and you could tell who's taken the course and how far they went through the course and certify them and all that stuff. But none of those things are going to tell you whether or not you're improving time to make quota, improving time to first deal. We want that, right?
Right.
Now the rest of the sales pitch is just me showing you how I do that, because I've convinced you that value is so important. It kind of trumps everything else.
How long does it take individuals to really go through the process of creating that unique market insight?
Well, so in the work I do with companies, we do a workshop, and it's 3 days. So we spend 2 days working on the positioning. And in particular, we got to get really tight on this differentiated value, because that's the core of everything. So we got to make sure we understand who the competitors are. We understand what makes us different, and we understand the value that enables for customers. And then once we have that and we understand what a good fit customer looks like, then we can go and take that positioning and map it to the structure of the sales pitch. And we say, okay, well, now we understand what the differentiated value is. We can reverse engineer the insight. We know who the competitor is. We can talk about the pros and cons of the different approaches to the problem. And then we can sort of say, look, like knowing what we know and knowing what works and doesn't work in the market today, can we agree that this is what a good solution looks like? And then and that's just the setup. And then the rest of the pitch is, okay, this is how we do it. When I do it with customers, we do that in 3 days.
Okay. And how long does it take them to get that fully implemented? Usually depends on the, the size of the company, I'm sure. But at the same time, I mean, that's not just an effort where we write some sales copy and it's done.
Yeah.
What's involved in implementing that?
Yeah. So in terms of implementation, which in my opinion is where the rubber really meets the road on this stuff. So the first thing, the work I'm doing is getting everybody in agreement and alignment. And usually I'm working with a cross-functional team that's got marketing, sales, product management, the CEO in the room together. So we get agreement and alignment on here's where we're at with the positioning, and this is the storyboard for the sales pitch. What happens after that workshop is typically marketing and sales enablement, if you got it, sit down and they take that storyboard and put it in the company's beautiful PowerPoint with their nice graphics. And what we need is a deck. If you do a demo, a demo, and a script. Companies that move really fast on this stuff can get it done in less than a week. Companies that have a lot of moving parts and a lot of people need to be involved, sometimes that takes a month. Mm-hmm. So once we have that, then the way I recommend testing the pitch is typically to take 1 or 2 salespeople, and preferably very good senior salespeople, train them on this pitch deck internally, and then do a series of pitches with qualified prospects and see how the pitch lands. Typically what happens is there's a period of tuning where you're like, we don't really like this word, it's not really working, or this graphic is confusing people, we need to adjust it, or something. And so it really depends a lot on the volume of deals that you get. Like if you're selling monster deals, you don't get a lot of practice pitching because, you're not doing a lot of pitches. If you've got a big sales team and a high volume of deals coming through, you can get through that testing phase pretty quickly. So I've seen companies do it in a couple of weeks, and I've seen companies that, that testing phase is more like 2 months. Once it's tested and everybody's feeling good that it's validated and the reps are like, yep, we like this deck, and importantly, we like this pitch way better than the old pitch, then the pitch needs to get rolled out to the rest of the sales team. So it's a little bit easier. Now I've got a couple of reps that are good at it, so I can record them doing it. I can use them to fine tune the script. And then I've got the ability to have sales train sales or be involved in the sales training to go out and train the rest of the field. Depending on how big your team is, that could be a couple of days or a couple of weeks. And then all this pitch stuff goes back to marketing, and they need to go back and rework the messaging in their marketing materials or their marketing campaigns or the homepage or wherever else the messaging works, so that we're all telling the same story. So I've seen companies do the implementation of this stuff as quickly as in a month. They've got it all implemented and they're ready to go. One of the biggest companies I ever worked with, big, publicly traded, massive company, but, one of the biggest tech companies in the world, it took them about 6 months, and they were the slowest.
Okay. Do you find, as a general rule, creating a positioning team is better than just having sales and marketing do it and present it to the company?
It's way better, like 1,000 times better, for a bunch of reasons. So one is, I think it's a mistake not to have product involved, because I think product really understands differentiated capabilities. They might not understand differentiated value, but they really understand technically where the product is different than the other things on the market. And often what we've got in tech companies is some really interesting, fantastic tech that marketing and sales doesn't understand enough to be able to figure out the value of. So we really need product in the room to be able to help us understand, we've got this feature that's different. So what? Like, tell us about it. How does that work? How is that different than the way the other folks do it? We need to really deeply understand how our approach is different to the problem than anyone else. So we need product in the room. The other thing is that, if we don't involve the CEO, or, if it's a really big company, like maybe it's the general manager of the division, if we don't involve that person, we run the risk that, sales and marketing does their little thing and they come up with something that they think works really good for sales and marketing. But then the CEO pops up and says, wrong. I don't agree with that. That's not the way I pitch it. Where did this come from? Why are you saying it like that? I don't understand anything about it. And then you end up having to relitigate the whole thing again. It's better, in my opinion, it's better to have a cross-functional team together. We get the input from everybody, which is valuable. But we also get, as we're working through it, everybody understands how we got to where we got to. Everybody understands the story. Everybody's in agreement and alignment. And we eliminate that risk that 2 weeks later, somebody pops up and says, wait a second, I didn't get my input in here, and I think this is all wrong.
In what role do you think emotions play in that positioning team? We all have organizations that have turf battles.
Oh, yeah.
They fall in love with a feature. They fall, somebody actually created one of those features and put it in, and they can't say goodbye to it. What role does emotion play, and what's your experience in that area?
So a lot of my work has been focused on trying to get around that. So when I first started working on positioning stuff, I thought, well, I'm the head of marketing. I can just do that on my own. And then I quickly learned that, nope, that's not going to work because I come up with this, what I think is genius positioning, and then sales laughs at me and never uses it. And so I thought, well, at a minimum, I'm going to have to get sales involved. And then I bumped into this problem. Well, we didn't really we didn't always understand this cool tech and how it was different from other things in the market. So we had to get product involved. And then it became very clear that if we didn't get the CEO involved, the thing wasn't going to stick. So we got to get the CEO involved. And so I got sold on this idea. We need to do this with a cross-functional team if we wanted to survive. The second thing was, well, if I get this cross-functional team together and we don't have a process to follow to figure out the positioning, then it just becomes a battle of opinions. And let me tell you, marketing never wins that battle. Like, nobody cares about marketing's opinion on anything practically. So what would happen is we get the gang together, and what they want to do is they want to jump right to value and say, well, why does everybody love our stuff? And the CEO would say, well, I think it's this. And sales would say, I think it's this. And product would say, well, I think it's this. And everybody's just giving their opinion. And it's like you say, they got their pet feature or their pet thing, or, that, we won a deal last week and they love that thing. So that must be the thing. So my process is really all about, we can't take the emotion out of it completely, but we do want to try to take as much as possible we're just having a battle of opinions out of it. So the way I work with folks is we'll start with, if you didn't exist, what would a customer do? So let's start there, because we kind of know the answer to that. What's interesting is different parts of the company will disagree, but sales knows the real answer. Sales knows what the status quo is we're replacing in a typical account, and sales knows who ends up on the short list. So if we start there, then we got a stick in the ground, and we can all kind of agree on this and say, look, this is what we have to position against, or put another way, this is what we have to beat in order to win a deal. So now we've got that. It's pretty easy to get agreement around that. Product will want to bring in a bunch of competitors that nobody's ever heard of. But usually, we can explain to them that, look, like, if this Horizon competitor starts causing us pain and landing on shortlist, we'll adjust the positioning for that. But once we understand that, it's pretty easy to get folks in agreement. Okay, here's who we have to position against. So we got that, competitive alternatives. Then we go just to features, like not to value, just features. So we'll start there, because again, it's kind of easy. So we say, well, what features do we have that the other guys don't? And when I say features, I mean features of the product, but also we can bring in characteristics of the company, like we do professional services and they don't have professional services, or, we have 24/7 support all around the world and they only do US only 9 to 5 and things like that. Our pricing model is different, for example. We put all this stuff on the board, all the features we have of the product, all the capabilities of the company. And then once we have that, then we can say, okay, we've got this thing the other guys don't. So what? What's the value of that thing? So what is the value that feature enables for customers? And I can go down that list and map that to a small number of value themes or value buckets. And at the end of that, what I've got is pure differentiated value. Now, someone can pop up at that moment and say, well, my pet thing isn't there. Like, I think they buy us because, you'll get this one a lot sometimes. Like, sales teams sometimes will come up and say, well, the reason they buy from us is because we're such nice people. I mean, they just like us. Like, we're really good. We really develop a relationship with the customer. They really buy us for that. And there may be an element of that, but again, they can't sell their boss on that. They can't go to their boss and say, yeah, I picked this one because I really like Joe, the sales rep. He's great. They're going to have to make a case based on real stuff. So when we get there, then we've kind of, as much as we can, taken the opinions out of it, because we're going to build up to it instead of going straight to it and having everybody say, well, I think it's this. Well, I think it's this. I think it's that. Once we have the list, then someone can say, well, I don't think that's true. I think it's this. And you can say, well, is that actually differentiating? Because I bet the other guys have nice sales reps too. So that's how I try to deal with it.
So I'm going to give you a scenario, and I'd like you to comment on it.
Sure.
You through every step that you just talked about, which is an extremely valid process to follow. It keeps everybody focused. It keeps you on tact. You're talking about actual, I'm going to say, things people can understand.
Yeah.
And they can grasp, and then they can put a number to it, in effect, to start quantifying the value that we're offering. What do you think about someone then taking the IQ, or I'm sorry, the EQ side, the emotional intelligence side, and going to the salespeople and say, how would you feel about selling this value? How would you feel about selling that value? And go through the emotional intake, if you will, to see, because IQ, I think, and numbers direct, but emotion drives. And in a sales team, if you don't have the emotional drive, you're dead in the water. You don't have urgency. You need both. Could you comment on that?
Yeah. Like you're saying the emotions of the salespeople, like how they
Yes.
feel about
Yes.
selling this
Yes.
stuff.
To take the
Interesting.
product out.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, part of the thing that I'm expecting, when I've got a cross-functional team, and particularly when it comes to sales, like it's so important that sales believes in what we've got at the end of this process, because in a lot of ways, like if it's enterprise software and we're selling with a sales team, like they are the front lines of where deals happen or they don't happen. And so we can do a lot of things to get things into the pipeline and get it there. But if it falls apart in sales, we all die. Like that's how it works.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're assembling this cross-functional team, typically I've got more than just the sales executive in the room. So typically I've got the vice president of sales, but I also have a couple of senior AEs in the room to gut check on all this stuff as we're going along. And so it's my job as the facilitator of this process to make sure that those people don't get steamrolled in this process. So we might get to something that everybody's really excited about, but I'm the person there saying, no. Okay, so stop. You two folks, the AEs, what do you think about this? Can you sell this? Does this fly? Can you picture yourself doing this story? Like, does it actually work? And if the answer is no, we haven't done our job. So we got to go back to the sales. And so first I got to create an environment where they feel safe saying, no, that ain't it. And then secondly, I got to make sure that their voices are heard in the room. Otherwise, again, we're dead in the water. And sometimes this is hard because often you've got a CEO with a really big personality, a really A-type person, a person that's very passionate about this stuff, has a really big opinion about it, but also a person that maybe hasn't really been in the trenches selling for a while and don't really understand the reality of the competitive landscape on the ground right now. And so that's why we need those people in the room. I also think it's a good reason to have an outside facilitator in this process that is kind of outside of the politics of the inside organization that can sort of come in and say, well, wait a second, these folks are actually going to have to deliver this message. Does it work for you?
Yeah. And I think a lot of times people overlook the fact that in sales, you get pounded with no's and rejections all the time. And that's all pure emotion. That's pure emotion. And the saving feature has to be my product carries some value that I get excited about because I can see it winning in a company and I experience that win. And
this is so important. This is so important. Like, I feel like the sales team needs to not just intellectually understand the value that the product delivers that no one else did. They need to feel it in their bones.
Exactly.
And it can't just be pretty words on the page and everybody's memorizing the pretty words on the page. They got to believe it, right? They got to believe it, and they got to believe this thing. And if you get through this workshop and you've got a couple of kind of skeptical sales reps that are like, nah, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, then we're not there.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, when I was at IBM, I had a very good sales manager. Never forget him. And he always told me, sell with emotion. It's your drive. Close with the facts. Close with the logic, the numbers. Yeah. And I think that's good advice. So you go through your process. Somebody has their entire the setup, and they have the follow through all in place. They're starting to be successful. They're driving the business. You're seeing it succeed. How does that make you feel?
Well, this is, this is, I live for this stuff, to be honest. I mean, it there's two things, right? One is, I think if you're a really good consultant, you understand that you're just a little piece of the puzzle. Like, it's not my work, it's their work. And the magic in a lot of this stuff is due to the amazing execution of the team after you manage to get this first part locked in. But without the amazing execution of the team, none of it matters. So I love it when it all comes together because, my piece of that is just, water, horse, water. Look at there's the water. But they have to drink it. I can't do that for them. And so I love it when it all comes together. I am extraordinarily, I would say, choosy about companies that I work with. Like, I have the privilege, I guess, of doing this for a long time, and people kind of know who I am. And I'm just one person, so there's only so many weeks of the year and so many of these that I can pull off in a given time. So I get to be a little bit choosy, and so I'm careful to not pick companies where there's any doubt in my mind about whether or not we can do something good. So if we decide we're going to do it, we're going to do it. And so I think that eliminates a bit of heartbreak on that end too, in that, I'm trying to do some kind of assessment of, one, is this really a positioning problem or is it something else that they've got? If it's not a positioning problem, then let's not tackle positioning. Let's tackle the other thing first. And then two, do I really think these folks can pull it off? Like, if we go and do this bit of work, are they capable of doing the 9 million little execution piece parts that need to happen afterwards that no consultant can do for you? Like, this is the vice president of marketing, the vice president of sales, the vice president of products job to make this thing real across marketing, sales, and product. Is the company capable of doing that? And again, if I feel like maybe they're not, then, well, let's just not do it in the first place, because that'll just make me sad.
You've had a great career as far as working for businesses, running departments, learning, experimenting, and constantly fine-tuning your skill set. You started a consulting business, and you have authored 2 books. So what's in the future for April?
That's a good question. I really like the work that I'm doing right now. Like, I kind of feel like this is like, April's boss level form. I'm not sure there's a thing that happens beyond this, to be honest. My goal in the next couple of years is, again, to be able to do this work with companies that I think they're really good, and, do it in a way where I think I'm adding a lot of value. And then beyond that, I don't know. I kind of just take this thing at 2-year stretches at this point. I'm a bit like, if the next 2 years looked like the last year, I think I'd be okay with that.
Okay. Do you have a preference, big company, small company?
Right now I do a mix of both. And I mean, define small is one thing. So right now I'm doing a mix of both. I'm doing a lot of companies that are in 100, 200, 300 million revenue, I would say, makes up the bulk of my business right now. But then there's a handful that are much, much bigger than that, and a handful that are much smaller than that. And I think it's good. It's a good mix to see what's happening across all of those. I used to work with very small companies, like Series A stage companies that were maybe a couple million revenue. I don't do as much of those anymore. Mainly because I think I'm too expensive for them, and they don't want to wait. Like, usually I booked up more than a quarter, so they can't wait a quarter because things are moving really fast and evolving really fast. And so I have been doing some thinking about, well, how could I potentially get a few more of those in the mix with a different pricing structure, a different offering or something, because sometimes I miss working with those really small ones.
Yeah. Well, a lot of times that's where the real creativity and urgency is, and that can be a lot of fun.
There's a lot of cool new
fun.
stuff, right? Like there's a lot of neat tech coming out in these really, really small companies. But so it would be fun to do a bit more of that. But I don't know. The flip side of it is like, man, like I can't, like sometimes I'm amazed at the innovation coming out of companies that are much, much bigger. And, really cool stuff that you're just like, like it's pretty frequent for me to just get blown away by stuff that my companies are pulling off at this point. Like even when they're 300, 400 million revenue, you're like, whoa, that's pretty cool.
That's exciting. It definitely is exciting, addicting in its own way.
Yeah.
So April, if somebody wants to contact you, what's the best way of doing that?
Well, my website's aprildunford.com. So you can go there and you can learn a bit more about, what I offer as a consultant. And then if you just want to get smarter about positioning and how to build a sales pitch with positioning, like my books are a good starting point. So the first book is called Obviously Awesome, and that outlines my structure for doing positioning work. Second one is called Sales Pitch, which is how do we map the positioning stuff into a good sales pitch. That's a good starting place. And then if you want to talk to me directly, you just check it out on the website. There's a form there you can fill out and we'll get you on the phone.
Okay. April, thank you very much for your time. Very interesting, informative conversation. Enjoyed it very much. And thank you for your time.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me.
Hi, Ted Wolf here. I want to thank you for joining us for this Implementors video. The Implementors podcast is presented by Guidewise, where we, along with our vetted member community, recognize that ideas are easy, but implementation is hard. To learn more about getting things done with Guidewise, please visit us at guidewise.io. And to conquer your implementation struggles, please like and share this video and subscribe to our channel. Happy implementing.